On today's Hiwatt Soundbite, we're breaking down viruses. Oh man, lyrically, how relevant is this song today? Classic ogre, a solid 10 years ahead of our time. Well, that's Viruses from Skinny Puppy's 2011 album Handover. And this track came together in a very unique and special way. And so for today's session, I want to share exactly how the magic went down in this collaboration. Well, this song was literally started by accident one morning when I walked in my old studio in LA and I popped a disc in the CD player. When I pressed play, this is what came out of the speakers. Well, the sound of that screwed up CD player had me scrambling that morning. I couldn't get him record fast enough. And when I got Pro Tools up and running, I proceeded to record over 2.5 hours of this magical CD player. The thing literally had a mind of its own. It would create grooves and be skipping on one section and creating this really cool groove. And then randomly it would just jump to some other place on the disc and start skipping somewhere else. That is the only time that this CD player has ever done that. Before that morning, I'd never heard it, and I'd never heard it since. Well, am I ever glad that I managed to capture that unique moment. And the fact that the disc that I dropped in the player that morning was one of my own projects, so there was no infringement issues. It was just so awesome. This crazy thing had a mind of its own. Check out the drum pattern that this thing played all by itself. What a killer loop, and you can see from this piece of audio that I didn't do any edits to that. That's just the CD player pulling that off. I found a really good loop point for it, and that's exactly why my tempo reads 106.5949. 4 decimal places. Not unusual when I'm taking a raw file like I did on this track and trying to find a loop point. Many of you can relate to that, I'm sure, where you just find some freehand piece of music that you recorded with no tempo map and you try and put it to a grid, you try and find a tempo. Just keep guessing and adjusting those tempos until you find something that works. And so very often when I'm starting with a raw file like I was here, I'll end up with a really weird tempo, and I think that's probably pretty common. And here's another killer pattern that I found a little bit later in the recording. Check this. Well, I took those 2 loops and I arranged them into this. I have no idea what I had intended to do in the studio that day, but I went back and checked all the timestamps, and apparently I got inspired because 13 hours after I finished that 2.5 hour recording, I bounced out what became a Skinny Puppy demo, a really cool arrangement and a song idea that I sent over to Kevin. Well, Kevin got totally stoked about this idea and ended up sending me back some epic tracks, stuff that only Kevin can do. This is one of the reasons that I've always been a fan of collaboration. When you bring everybody's strengths together and you collaborate, oh man, the power of collaboration can just be outrageous, right? Some of you I know can relate to what I'm talking about. There's certain things that only Kevin can bring to a Skinny Puppy project, just like Ogre and just like Mark, right? Each one of us has our strengths that we bring to the table, and this has always been one of my personal favorite parts of collaborating. And so what does Kevin end up sending me back? Check this. Absolutely killer. Check that out on its own. So uniquely Kevin, I love it. And then, as I often did, I sent this track up to my humble brother, Traz Damji, and Traz sent back a little bit of icing. Killer track. I was so excited to send this over to Ogre and Mark, and of course, they stepped up. And you can see my working title is CD F Up. It's pretty suitable. Well, let's break down this little groove section a bit. Here's the original source loop that I was working from. Well, I turned that into this. That's the result of me gating that track and then keying it with the drum pattern that I came up with. So let's have a listen to those two together. Plus, I'm actually playing that gate, right? I've talked about this in past sessions where I jump on the threshold of that gate and I actually play it rhythmically in time. I love the effects of playing a gate's threshold like that. So effective. So let's check out the next part I added. It's called Ouch. And then I added a fill on top. And then I accentuated the kick drum with some beef. And then to interact with all of that weird skipping that's going on in the CD player, I added a bit of a groovy hi-hat. Yeah, this song has always had a special place for me in the unique way that it came together. And I believe that this forms the only Skinny Puppy song that ever started with one of my demos. So, of course, it has a special meaning for me. And particularly the way it all came together, there's magic involved. Sometimes, as a recording engineer, you just have to be prepared, right? Am I ever glad that I was prepared and ready to record that day? It's turned into a pretty epic track and something that I'm very, very proud of. Well, thank you very much for sitting in on today's session, and a special thanks to Ogre, Kevin, Mark, and Traz for one of my favorite collaborations.